Why do you go to church? By special request this week, we muse over the question, why do you go to church? And this is a big question for many of us, myself included, and there may not be only one reason why we go to church, but rather a multitude of reasons, some that we're aware of and some that we're not aware of. I thought about this question a lot as I discerned my call to the priesthood. As many of you know, I have attended church my whole life, in some ways simply because that's what my family did. In many ways, going to church was not a choice for me early on. It was the tradition of my family, or at least part of my family. As a teen, growing up in the choir, I consciously told myself that I was going to church to sing, to be part of a community, part of a team. And I didn't want to let anyone down by not showing up. When I first got to university, I stopped going to church. It wasn't built into my routine anymore. It was scary to go somewhere new on my own. And to be honest, it was just easier not to go. At this time, other parts of my prayer life really picked up. And sometimes, to be honest, I didn't even notice the loss of not going to church. But sometimes it really hit me hard. One reason why I go to church now is to connect with God. I don't believe you need to necessarily always be in the church building to do this, but for some it can help. In church, the ritual of the service, the words of the prayers, the reflection on scripture, the art, the music, and more all help me to delve deeper into my relationship with God and reflect on the moments where I have seen God in my life. I believe each relationship in our lives needs care and attention. And going to church is one way that I care for my relationship with God and continue to build it and feel connected. Another reason I go to church now is to pray with all of you. There's a misconception that the people in the church building or worshiping anywhere are the people who have the most unshakable faith. People go to church because they 100% believe. I have not found this to be the case. Whether I'm sitting in the pews or whether I'm standing behind the altar, there are times when I struggle with my faith. Times when I'm broken down, when I'm frustrated or angry or feel alone. In those times, I go to church to be with a community of believers who can uphold me in my struggle, who pray with me and for me when the best I can do is just show up. I'm thankful for what many of you do in those times without even knowing it. And it's an honor for me to uphold all of you in prayer as well. Finally, another reason I go to church now is to learn about and prepare myself for the life I want to live. When I leave church, one of the greatest gifts is the feeling of empowerment in my call as a Christian to live out the rest of my week and beyond. The call to love my neighbor, to love God, to share the gospel with those whom I encounter is very powerful, and it grounds me in all that I do. I once read that the church is a community who are learning to live to the glory of God, which means to live in such a way that we enhance God's reputation in the world. I rather like that quote. It's important to note that the person who put forward this question for Midweek Musing felt that it might be a good topic to reflect on since the church has reopened for worship in person, but may need to close again in the midst of the pandemic. With a continued high number of cases for COVID-19, the fact that the church might have to close for in-person worship again is a reality that I mentally prepare and brace myself for each week. In some ways, it keeps me on my toes and knowing I have to be flexible. And in other ways, it keeps me anxious and sad. However, these past months, I have seen the creativity of gathering for church in new ways. In our community, we have done this through church at home packages, Zoom services, and joining with St. James Cathedral online. It has comforted me to know that in times when we cannot gather together in person, we are not sacrificing the act of worshiping, loving God, and loving our neighbor, albeit it is in new ways. The changes to worship can be difficult, frustrating, and lonely. But for me, continuing to go to church, even when not in the building, helps get me through these moments even more. I invite you to reflect on this question yourself. Why do you go to church? How have you felt when you cannot physically go to the church building? There's a lot to unpack here, but it's helpful to start somewhere. It is an honor to grow in faith together, even while apart.